Welcome to this episode of Northern Echoes. We are truly gifted today to be able to speak to David Bastedo, a world-renowned photographer,
Oh, you're so generous.
creative technologist, storyteller, just an incredible
Uncomfortable.
an incredible eye with the camera, a historical chronologizer.
I like that.
David, thank you so much for speaking with
Oh,
us today.
you're welcome. Thank you for coming out to me.
Yeah, it's
Welcome to my little space.
yeah, no, we went on a tour a little earlier on, and
I set it up just for you.
you did, and
did.
thank you so much for that. Like, we went on a little tour at a house earlier on when you showed us your basement and how important the basement was, and how important the basement is to all of us guys.
I'm a basement dweller.
All of us guys, anyways,
All
right?
my good work happens in the basement.
So, and there was a lot of historical pieces down there that carried a lot of purpose and meaning.
The archives, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself, but I'm probably speaking on behalf of a lot of other people, your images resonate with us, is each of them has a purpose and a meaning behind them, and they have a definite emotional connection to them.
Thank you.
I can say that personally myself, David, that your work has connected with me before I even met you. Right? So that's a pretty surreal thing, right? And that as a photographer is probably one of the goals that you had. So we'll get into all your interesting work coming up. But I'd like for you to, we like to kind of, Northern Echoes, we like to take a look at the people that hold up the music industry and hold up, the behind the scenes kind of work. The bands recognize it all the way through through their tours and stuff like that.
Well,
shout out to the crew, because
It takes a lot to put on a show.
it's a village, man. You know what I mean? And coming from my events industry experience, it's the lead up planning and all the things that you've got to be ready for show night. You just don't show up with the instruments, right?
Yeah.
And you chronicleize that in your photography work. And what we want to do is we want to hold up people like you, so that we say thank you for what you do for music in the bands, right? And that should not go unspoken. And it's always okay. So I finished a gig, I'm on to my next gig, right? Where are you going? I'm going out with whoever, right? But there's a real community and there's a real family in the Technologist and the live event and live concert technology, right? And that, to me, that's as loud as the music for me.
Yeah, there's more technology now than ever before, really.
Yeah. So tell me, so we like to go in and find your story. Like, I want you to tell me where you were raised, where you were born.
I'm a Toronto boy, born and bred. I'm a 8th generation Torontonian.
Which part of Toronto are you from?
I grew up at Yonge and Bloor, more or less. Yonge and Bloor and Avenue Road in Davenport. I lived downtown my entire life.
So you would remember a place called Master John's.
No.
Just south, Boots. That's where all the rock and roll boots were done. Yonge and Bloor just south. There was a Yonge and College just south. Might have been Yonge and College just south. South Maple Leaf Gardens. Yep.
Maple Leaf Gardens, it was my high school job.
Oh.
I worked at Langlois Sports.
Very cool.
During the Brophy years. Wendell Clark, Russ Courtnall, a lot of bad hockey. I barely watch sports anymore, but I went to every Maple Leaf games for years.
Really?
Yeah, I worked 15, before the game, and then during intermissions and after the game.
Well, that's a great experience, right?
For years, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of like when you take a look at your journey, right? And that's, arenas, right? Like right, knowing where all the back doors are in the arenas, either to get out or to get in.
For sure. But yeah, I worked at Langlois Sports at Maple Leaf Gardens. When I went to Jarvis Collegiate, I went to 3 high schools, got kicked out of private school. Private school, I went to Upper Canada College, where I started in grade 3 at private school. My dad was an old boy there, but in grade 8, they had this thing called options, and I chose photography. And in grade 8, I learned how to develop black and white photographs. And I was a troubled student. Not only we had weekly report for the troubled students, I was on daily report.
Were you on a check-in?
Every day.
Every day.
And I have those report cards. My father, who passed away about a year ago, saved all my report cards, and I have them. And yeah, they're pretty bad. They did not want me there.
Did they have just the marks, or did they have some of the comments?
No, I have all the comments, more than the marks.
Do you remember certain teachers that made those comments?
I remember all my teachers.
Yeah, we carry that with us through the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah. And all my teachers were not good or good people.
Well,
it was a different time, Toronto, back in those days, apparently.
Upper Canada College was a private
private school, yes.
So was it a religious private school?
Not religious.
No?
No.
But it was upper crust. So
it was upper crust, yes. Anyway, so I went there and I learned how to take photographs. In grade 9, after grade 9, they chose not to allow me to come back. And then I went to Jarvis Collegiate, where I got hit by a car and sued the person who hit me and made enough money to buy my first real camera, which was a Canon T70, which I still have. And my youth, I played pool and worked in my darkroom. And I had a darkroom until I was in my 20s at university.
That's so you honed your craft, right? So
I used to take selfies
with
well, self-portraits, and I used to do portraits of friends, and I used to take friends out and we'd make photographs, and then I'd go back and smoke hash and develop them in my basement.
Quite an experience, right?
Yeah.
And we all had those kind of friends that were kind of delving into the art of photography when I went to college, right? So everybody...
I didn't. I was the photographer.
You were the friend, though.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying, right? That's where you hone and you learn your craft, right? And adolescence is a tricky spot when you're growing up, right? So there's a lot of self-time in there where you kind of develop who you are.
I spent a lot of time alone in my darkroom. Yeah. I didn't do very well in school. I failed math and French in grade 9, 10, possibly 11. No, I passed grade 11 math, and but I went to summer school probably 3 years in a row. And then I had to go to summer school to graduate from university because I failed Canadian history.
Interesting. And you were doing photography all along the way, right?
Yes. Until the end of university, digital and analog were kind of on opposite curves. And I dropped analog around end of university.
Now, up until that point, what did mom and dad want you to be doing up until that point?
My parents weren't really, for me at least, they were more concerned that I wouldn't graduate from anything. So they had a pretty good perspective in terms of school. My parents were very into education. My dad was an overeducated individual. He had a PhD and a law degree that he did concurrently, and he was a lawyer. My father's advice was, if you're the best at what you do, there will always be work for you.
Wise words from Tom. Very, very wise words.
And so he was more concerned about me being educated than what I actually did. My mother was a stockbroker. I took my securities course to about halfway, and then I said, no fucking way do I want to be a stockbroker. And but the stock market really interests me intellectually now, and I follow it every day, and I'm into companies, and but I did not want to be a stockbroker, and I eventually started after university. I did a history degree at Trent. I did a 3-year degree in 4.5 years, and I did, I think, grade 14 for high school.
We have that in Ontario?
Well, we had 13.
We did.
Yeah. And
I got my 13.
And I did 13 and a half.
Yeah. Extra credit. I did the same thing, right? So I took extra credits in case I didn't get the ones like, I needed 2 credits.
Well, maybe they were extra for you.
Yeah. I didn't get 2 credits, so I needed 2 credits more. And instead of taking 2 courses, I took 3 or 4 just in case I bombed those 2 that I should have got, right?
Yeah, well, some of my absences were higher than my grades for certain years. The other thing I did during high school is I played a lot of pool, so I skipped a lot of school to play pool. And so the 2 things that my parents did that were very wise, one is they gave me a camera and a dark room, and a few years later they put a pool table in my basement. And that kept me home. Yeah. And that kept me off the street, because up until then I was gambling in pool halls at 14.
Yeah, it's, and by the sounds of it, it was not, in those days you think that it could be like a little intense from the parents. They were figuring out how to navigate that path with you along the way, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
as a parent myself, right?
Both of my parents worked my entire life, I guess. So we were pretty independent kids, and I don't think they make kids today the way that they made them back then.
Yeah, we had to find our own way back then.
I was taking the subway alone in grade 3. That was not unusual.
So
subway, bus, walk.
Did you ever get out to all the end subway stations in Toronto?
Well,
that's quite an adventure. I've done that.
I do recall going on the east-west line without permission to go see a friend where he lived, and I don't think that was well received.
So you've been to Warden Station on the east side.
Oh, yes, but this was only Castle Frank, as I recall, but it was still outside of the norm.
It was outside of the geographical boundaries.
Outside of the area that I knew. And we rode our bikes a lot, too.
Yeah, and that's surprisingly, I don't see a lot of that today in teenagers. Like, that's a major mode of transportation.
They definitely make kids different. And the world was a different place then. So anyway, I did a lot of exploring.
Yeah, and I don't think kids do enough of that exploring today on an outside level, right? So
no, I know people who are parents who pick their kids up and drop them off every day of their lives, pretty much.
Yeah, and I've got a 17-year-old, so we've stopped doing that, right?
Yeah.
And we've noticed a marked improvement in his independence.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, back then we used to hang out at subway stations for hours smoking.
Yeah.
And we all collected at like St. Clair, or people collected at Eglinton. That was past where I was a St. Clair kid, because that's where my school was. But yeah, we hung out in alleyways smoking behind McDonald's or whatever.
Yeah, we used to sit on the stoop of the local plaza, right?
Yeah, and at Jarvis, I went to Jarvis after I got kicked out of Upper Canada, and we hung out at the coffee shops and the pool hall.
And there's not as much as that now as there was.
No, you can't smoke in a coffee shop.
Yeah, but you can't
I don't
even
smoke anymore, by the way.
You can't even loiter anymore anywhere.
No, you definitely, the world is different.
Move along. Come on, move along.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you wonder why teenagers don't come out of the house.
Yeah, I guess we had Intellivision and Atari back then. I was an Intellivision kid.
I was the Pong champion for
Were you?
yes. Pong was one of
and the Macintosh computer came out around then, and we had like head-to-head video games, and we collected hockey cards and played games with hockey cards when I was.
Did you lean them up against the wall
all
and
that
the flicker?
stuff. That was like grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
So after high school and college and university, your first gig. What was your first gig? Like, what was your first real paying gig?
I got a job as a production assistant from my friend Jeff. Helped me get this job. I was a PA on Kratz Creatures television series that was on PBS, and I think I was there for 2 years. I got a car, got my first cell phone, work phone, I think my second year. And then I worked in film and television for many years as a PA mostly. In the office, I worked in the Paragon head office as a receptionist. I answered 50 phone lines before we had voicemail. And during that time, while I worked during the day, I took a computer course at night, and I learned Photoshop, Illustrator, and Director, and maybe a little bit of HTML. And then my friend Jeff Goodwin, who got me this job, he was the assistant to the vice president of production. And we had this idea for a children's entertainment educational television show that we called Inside Out, and we wrote a little Bible for it. I think we wrote an outline for at least 13, but I feel like it was 26 episodes. And I applied to the Canadian Film Centre and the Vancouver Film Centre. I got into both, and I ended up doing a residency at the Canadian Film Centre. I think it started in 1996. It was the Media Links Habitat program at the time, and I was the second cohort in new media at the Canadian Film Centre.
Very cool.
And I did a project on dynamic digital storytelling.
And at that age, you would be how old? 24?
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Because I was with my wife. We were dating at the time when I graduated. So yeah, around 25.
So this path is walking, if you look at it now, a kind of predictable kind of evolution.
we in that project, we worked with a high school. We gave them cameras. We collected digital stories, and we learned how to edit in Premiere. And then through a piece of software that doesn't exist anymore, but it was sort of this guy Randy had written. We connected through hyperlink, audio, video, and text, and created this story called Our Definition. And it was the first dynamic digital storytelling.
Very cool.
And then I got a job in advertising by accident right after that at Chiat Day, and at a place called Think Interactive, which was the interactive sort of subsidiary of Chiat Day, started by their IT director. And I worked in advertising, did digital marketing for 20 years.
And this is way before social networks.
Oh my gosh, yes, way before social media.
So it was more website based.
All website based. And when I started working with the first band that I started working with was Hugh Dillon, and social media did not exist. And Hugh and I would go over to Hugh's house, and I had this idea that we could interact with people on the forum. And so I'd post things, and then we'd get phone numbers, and I would call them, and we would record the calls,
The conversation.
and then we would answer questions, and I would record them and then put them in Flash, and then we'd have like a little streaming Flash answer.
So you don't realize it, but that was the infancy of podcasting right there.
Yeah, and through my work with Hugh, I ended up working with the Tragically Hip, and I know I'm sort of jumping around a bit, but with the Tragically Hip, I actually wrote, and this was again before social media, Flickr and YouTube existed, and I wrote a 21-page paper on the future of music and the internet, which I presented to the Hip. And they hired me for a website, and I didn't want to just do a website. And I said, if I take this job, you have to allow me to create content. And I spent all the money that they gave me, almost all the money, on new gear. And I jump-started my photography career again.
So this is important if you look back in a time frame. Is before, I was speaking with our producer on the show today, Frank, on the way up, that everybody's a digital creator today. You see that in their title everywhere. You had that vision, a decade ago.
Yeah.
Right?
So, which is weird, because I was working in Flash.
Yeah.
And at one point, I was working at an agency, McLaren McCann, and we were working in Flash. And I remember not being able to track what we were doing in Flash. And I had this idea of creating a tracking program and recording everything that user did. And I took it to the head of IT, and they laughed in my face. It was too difficult and too hard, and there was not a room on the server.
That data is gold
to
right?
do that. So I have always been into data, and one of the things I did with the Hip over my career in the website was to create a dynamic website, data-driven website, and I worked with some of the fans who had created a setlist archive, and I created a setlist archive and a storytelling engine. And when YouTube and Flickr had come out, I figured out how to mine YouTube to enable video of a particular set list, to show up on the website. So like Bob Cajun on July 1st, 2000, if a Hip fan had recorded it and uploaded it to YouTube, I wanted it to show up right beside the lyrics, and I wanted someone to be able to leave a story about their experience, and I wanted to be able to show the photos that I had taken that I stored at Flickr, on Flickr at the time, and I figured all out how to do that.
All on the same page. And
that was the first time it had ever been done.
In this country and in this industry, the generosity of the public sharing of the Hip and the Hip music, this is the infancy. I think this is the infancy of that, is when that started.
So the Hip had always allowed fans to record audio. And what happened when I started working with them is people were asking about video, because YouTube existed and Flickr existed, but no one was really taking pictures. So I kept having to ask, are video cameras allowed? And then they would say yes. So then the fans would trade the angles and create
a full show.
Multicam
show.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there were a few fans who in particular and then they would also add the audio, because there were tapers.
Yeah.
So like all these fans would get together and they would sync it all together.
So they'd have the audio bed, right? A good audio bed. Some of them might even had board mixes at times, right?
Very rarely would. Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. And
it was not as common to have a board feed, because they didn't really give a board feed.
No.
So
If they pick it up, it would have been through a wireless IAM or something like that sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But they had microphones at the board. The board feed, the Hip recorded all their shows at the time. So I had board feeds, but the fans didn't really have board feeds that I'm aware of.
Right. And that was that was like a community in itself.
It was a full community. And when I got the job, one of the first things I did is I reached out to the community, and I integrated myself as much as possible in the community, and I learned who they were and what they were doing, and tried to figure out. And I invited a bunch of them down to the Phoenix to see what show was it? It was a Christmas fundraiser show for Eggplant Entertainment. And there's a name for it, but I forget what it was. And anyway, I invited a bunch of the community down, and I had a meet and greet.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, that outreach that community that the band, The Hip, had with their fans and with fans. I think that flourished through those kind of, you planted those seeds along the way, especially in the digital era. So that was pioneering in the industry.
Well,
right?
I don't like to claim anything, but I believe that I was the first, we'll call it webmaster, for a band that actually created their own digital content.
Yeah.
And The Hip actually had rehearsals specifically for me, where I would go to the bathhouse and record them for content. And Gord was really into it, and he was like, let's make some content.
Well, and it's, exposure, right? And you have to...
They didn't really... Nobody knew what it was at the time. So they would literally...
Well, if David...
let's make some content.
If David called it content, let's make some content.
It's like, because that's what they called it. That's what it was. Like, what's content? So I remember the first time that I went to the bathhouse, we all spent the night, and not normally at that time, not everybody would spend the night, but everybody spent the night, and they made me dinner, and Gord bought 2 pies at the Big Apple, and one was apple, and I can't remember, maybe the other one was blueberry or
I was gonna say
something like that.
But
he showed up with 2 pies from the Big Apple, and Paul bought big ass steaks, and we had a barbecue, and they made me dinner.
And we made content for dessert.
And we made content.
And we made content.
Yeah.
Well, it's instrumental that they would pick up on that and the importance in that, because today, if you don't have any content,
well, as I said, I wrote it in a paper, and I handed this paper.
Do you still have that paper?
Maybe. I might.
It might not be. It's not on a drive.
It might be.
It might be. I hope you still have the drive, right?
I have almost all of my drives. I've lost a few drives over the years. I lost about at least 1 year of photos-ish. Like, I lost the raw photos, not the exported photos.
So, so where are we in a year sense now?
Well, we've been jumped around.
Yeah. So where are we now in a?
We can be whatever year you want to be.
Okay,
but in 2004, I was working with Hugh Dillon, creating the first digital content. And in 2005, I started working with The Hip and bought a whole new set of gear. And I started filming with a Canon XL2 on mini DV. And I had maybe a Rebel camera, Canon Rebel, I believe. And then I started mostly with The Hip doing video. And then gradually over years, I found the video to be really time consuming, and I liked photography better.
So was it the edit portion on the video that
was
really
the digitizing and the editing?
Yeah.
But I shot a lot of my stuff to require no edit because I only had one camera. So I shot it live, so I didn't really have to edit.
Right.
Like
if you wanted from tip to toe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had to shoot. I had to figure out how to film a performance with one camera and tell a story.
And that, you know, sometimes when you're pushed to the edge, your best work comes out, right? So if you've got
a lot of that
limitations-
video is still on YouTube if you go back.
Right.
And like there were certain songs, and then I liked. I didn't always like the way it looked, so I sometimes made it black and white, and
different perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I when I first started shooting photographs, I refused to put them out in black and white, which is ironic. I thought it was a cop out.
Why did you think it was a cop out? Because there's a certain.
The reason I thought it was a cop out was because it was easy, and if it was almost too easy to make a photograph look good in black and white, and I felt that I wasn't good enough to capture the color if I put it out in black and white.
Right, because the black and white is kind of like a filter that would filter all the imperfections.
It was just
maybe
like
a gleam in a lighting bounce or something.
And then I
like
learned over the years that sometimes you weren't good enough
I don't
to capture the color.
I don't have any other choice. This one's going black and white. Right. But
and the colors that the of the live show, depending on, there were a lot of purples and pinks, and sometimes you just
too bright, too hot.
Too messed up.
Yeah, too hot. Right?
But I for years I didn't do any color. I mean any black and white. And I just shot Paul and the Skydiggers and the Sadies a few days ago, and the stuff I posted was all black and white.
Those black and whites. Oh.
But I also have color, but I like black and white. And I grew up in black and white, so I also thought that I'd done that before.
Well, and you also know that you're not really hiding any perfections. You're adding a different phase to the storytelling. Like it's that background lighting, the capture of the singer when he's dancing. You know what I mean? That just fit that black and white kind of imagery, right?
And just sometimes I enjoy it now, but I didn't back then.
Well, because you want to perfect your craft.
Yeah,
right?
I would never perfect my craft.
Well, your eye is incredible behind that lens.
Well,
right?
thank you. I think I don't even try and judge that.
Yeah, but
try and capture a good image, and I'm not a technical photographer, so a lot of my work is me trying to catch up to what I've messed up. Well, that's the way I look at it.
That's a trial and error that everybody goes through in life, right? So, like,
I don't know. I just I even look at my shots from Friday night, and I've hit a dial by accident, and a lot of it is just in the moment. But I've hit a dial by accident, and I might have 40 shots where the dial's set wrong and they're too dark or whatever, or too bright. I mean, whatever the case may be, or too slow, and I don't notice because I'm not looking.
Well, you're on the move, right?
I'm not looking at my settings. I'm looking at what's on the stage, and I often shoot with both eyes open. One eye is like what's around me, so I can walk. That took something to figure out, but I shoot with often two eyes open. One eye is like walking around, and one eye and looking for another shot. And one eye is through the lens.
Focusing.
Looking at what's in front of the lens, and the other eye is looking what's around me. So
your next shot, right?
Yeah, or
if I'm going to bump into somebody.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. How to maneuver and walk and shoot at the same time is and not get your head, like if there's a big concert and there's all sorts of cameras, like let's say the whole Man Machine Poem Tour, lots of cameras, and how not to bump into someone, or how to maneuver through a crowd of other photographers. And
because you've got to actually do that, because you've all got the same angle on the shot. If you're all lined up side by each, you've got to do something different.
You have to do something different, and you have to figure out what's going to happen. And working with bands and seeing them more than once, you kind of figure out where to be and what might happen, and you're always thinking about I'm thinking about what might happen, or trying to find the open space, or
Yeah, you know, with the hip, you probably got, okay, I'm going over to Robbie now because Robbie's going to do his bridge and he's going to do a solo.
I wish I
or
was
going to
that.
Paul.
A smart person would think that way. It goes right out the window for me. I totally forget. I'm like, I don't even know. Literally, I'd see 50 shows, and you would think I'm like right in the moment, and I'm not thinking like that.
Well, there was a lot of ad-libbing to their shows as well, too, right? So going off on the tangents and whatnot.
Thank you for that. You make me feel better.
Good cover up,
but yeah, yes. My brain doesn't work that way. I mean, every now and then it does, but I'm like too in the moment.
So you've done some pretty historic pictures, and you know, particularly when you did the Man Machine Poem Tour, and you know,
Yep.
we spoke earlier about how historic that tour was in a Canadiana sense.
Yes.
And how it, you know, let me give you a little bit of perspective on it, and just as a fan, how kind of my perspective on it was when we heard the news about Gord, and the hip had always been around as a Canadian person growing up with me, and everybody says they're our house band, and you know, they were just always around telling the stories of our country, right, which made them extremely unique, right, and Gord's social conscious and the social message was something that, you know, wasn't abundant in the musical scene in Canada throughout our lifetime, right? And when the announcements came of Gord's illness, it was, you know, for me, it was a little bit of a sobering moment on my mortality myself, because I'm of similar age, right?
I think everybody in many ways thought about that, and one of the things that I think hit home for people of that generation is, if it can happen to Gord, it can happen to me.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And we'd lost that. We were looking, you know, this hadn't happened at the time, but it was like, okay, so this isn't like an era defining moment, right? Much like hockey had been through our lives in 1972 when Paul Henderson scored that goal. It was a defining Canadian moment, right?
I was 2, so I wouldn't know.
I was, I think I was 8 at the time, right? And we watched it on black and white TV on those Cyclops TVs that had the 4 legs, right? And the whole school shook when Henderson scored the goal.
Yeah.
You know, you look at Sidney Crosby's goal. You know what I mean? These are kind of like very Canadian.
The great one passed it to the pretty darn good one.
Yeah, the pretty darn good one. Yeah. So 2010, right? When we reclaimed our hockey. Yeah. So these are defining Canadian moments where the country all got together, right? And when the Man Machine Poem Tour took place, it was, you know, it was a surreal moment in our national identity where, you know, it was kind of like, okay, this is, you know, a moment that we all want to be a part of, right? And these are these songs are important to us. This tour is important to us, and you got to tour and be the official tour photographer for that tour. And so your work, your lens, were our eyes into that final tour with this great band, right? You know. So for us, what you produced during that 6 to 8 weeks was, you know, impeccably important and impeccably emotional, and it was very emotional, right? And it had to be.
It was emotional. I think for everybody it was emotional for everybody on tour.
Yeah, I remember. 100%. I remember Billy Ray putting out a kind of post that, you know, it'd be great if we could all sing "O Canada" at the beginning of the show, and you know, it just had that moment of wow, you know.
Oh, for a guy like Billy who had been with them their entire career, it was more so than for me,
for sure.
And I never was with them all the time on tour previously. I'd kind of go in and out, and I do Ontario and do a bunch of shows here or there, but for the guys who were with them all the time, it would have been even more so.
Well, the thing about that particular band is that family aspect, that family band kind of feel.
Absolutely. They treated me like a family, and they were very special. And it was a life-changing, phenomenal experience. And
did the reality of it sit with you? Because some of those photos that you came out from that tour were, you know what I mean, like iconic, and some of them are behind us right now.
I spent my time trying not to mess up.
Don't hit that other guy's camera.
That's the way I try and do most things. Honestly, taking pictures, I just try not to screw up too badly. I screw up everything. Like, in terms of, I told you, I'm not a technical photographer. Nothing of mine is ever going to be perfect. I don't try for perfection. I just try and get a good image. And like, some photographers get hung up on, my image isn't crisp enough, it's not in focus. I never have ever had all my images in focus. My images are not crisp. Some of them are and some of them are not. I don't even know if I know how to focus my camera properly.
Well, you're doing pretty good at that. You're doing pretty good.
I'm just being honest. I do not know if I try and change my settings now and to see if I can focus my camera better. I don't know if it's me or my camera or my lens. My lenses are all banged up because I treat my gear like it's gear.
You're on the road, dude.
Exactly. I put my bag down and I stuff them all in there, and then I take them out and I take pictures.
I'm sure you've had the odd time where you cracked lens with the photographer next to you and go, yours okay? Mine's good. We're good. Let's go.
I try not to do that, but I have had a lens roll off the table and the filter break more than once. I've done that a few times. Always get a filter on your lens if you can.
It survives the first bounce.
Saved 3 of my lenses.
Good bounce protection.
Definitely saved my lenses. But anyways, yeah, I'm not a technical photographer. I'm an emotional photographer, I think.
Yes.
And I look for the emotion, and I look for the negative or the open space, and I look for the moment. And then I go back to editing, and I try and remember what I found, and I really don't like editing. And I try and do it quickly because I find it kind of boring.
Well, you can overanalyze in an edit. That's what I...
Yeah, I kind of like most of these images, I go really quickly because I'm trying to get it done. And I'm like, oh, there's a good one, there's a good one, that one. And I go... And then some of them I go back after the fact. And, I'm sure I could go now through them again and do a better edit. And I'm always questioning my edits, like too much of this slider or too much of that slider or not enough, too much clarity or too much sharpening. And I'm sure there's someone who could edit my photos better than me.
I've had this discussion again with our producer Frank, and when we're doing video editing, is like you're never done.
No,
you're always going back, snipping a little here and snipping a little there, and then you finish, you fit it, you do your render, you put it out there, and you go, I could have changed that, right?
There is that, but what I found when I've had other people try and edit my photos even right after a show, and they never find the photos that I would.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They always pick different photos.
Yeah. Let's go back to that point of you try and find space. Okay, so you said like 3 things there, right, in it that were like a technique kind of thing, right? So you said open space, find space, put yourself, so as a perspective, you put yourself in a position for the photo to find you.
Yeah, and I think actually maybe Mike Downey said it about my work ages ago. I don't know where, don't know when, but I kind of recall it was him. Is because I spent a lot of time with a video camera, and I was walking with the band and walking with Gord and trying to figure out where he would be so I could walk there and move my lens there. I kind of got into this different notion of photography with live music, and that I would find the space before the singer found it.
The talent found it. Yeah.
And I would be there waiting for the image.
Yeah, right.
Kinda. Looking for the open.
You didn't pick that up. Yeah.
You know, and I try not to react. I try and be proactive in a lot of things. And I think maybe what it is, I'm being proactive in, at least for the hip, in the space. And the other thing is Gord in particular, and you know, Andy Mays is a bit like it as well. And they use their whole body to tell their story on stage. So I needed to find a way to allow for the body, the arm to outstretch, because it's not the arm outstretching, it's the one beat where it's totally outstretched, where something would happen. And
the
then
full extension.
Back. Yeah, it's like, you know, Gord would tell a story with his body and his dance, and you had to allow for the body to move, and you had to be prepared for it. And with allowing space for the body, there's a lot of space around. So I like black, and I like a lot of black space to create the negative space, and I try not to center my photos. And I also, it took me a long time, but you have to move with the lights. So you have to figure out how to take a picture with the lights. So sometimes you have to move your body so the light is behind the player to allow for the actual photograph, but then you get all this other cool lighting effect. And that took I don't know how, that just took time to figure out. And so you're kind of weaving and bobbing with the light and the singer or the musician to try and line everything up. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you get a lot of spillage and a lot of maybe unusable shots, but then there's these moments that are gold in between.
Yeah, so the depth of field, especially with lighting.
Depth of field, schmealed.
You don't want to do technique, right?
No, you shoot everything wide open. At least I do.
Just go for it, right?
You know, every now and then I'm like, oh, I should adjust my aperture. I'm like 2.8.
There's some.
I don't know.
So I think with Mike's point, there's probably validity in that, right? So you're.
I told you I can't. Going back to the depth of field, I'm not a technical. I just shoot wide open, and then every now and then I'm like, oh, I should adjust the setting. I'm gonna try it 4 point something, and every now and then I do.
Yeah, shooting. So you're shooting in an environment, right? And so that environment, you've got to work around that environment to capture some of that environment, but still capture that emotion.
Yeah, if I'm shooting, like I spend money on glass, so I have a 1.250. That's too thin for most live music. Like the focus is just too thin, so you're not shooting at 1.2 very, like, unless it's pitch black.
Right.
You're shooting at like 2.8 or whatever.
Right.
But
that's about as technical as you want to. Right.
You know, and then I try to keep my ISO as low as I can, but it's usually between 2,000 and 3,000. I like around 22 or 24. I don't know, whatever it is. So that's a good sweet spot, right? For me.
Yeah.
Anything else is too dark, or it just doesn't work. I don't know. So, and then the other thing that happened over time, and I got older, my eyes started going, so I can't see the back of my camera without reading glasses. So I just stopped looking at the back of my camera. So every photographer you'll see just like takes a picture and looks at the back of the camera. And I gave that up a long time ago because I can't be bothered to put my glasses on and off. And what I do now is every like 50 photos or something, whenever in between a song, I'll look at the back of my camera and I'll just go and see what my exposure's like.
Right.
I have no idea.
Just to check in.
I have no idea if they're in focus. Like the other night, Friday night, I realized I'd hit my manual auto button on my lens, and I was shooting in manual by accident. So all my photos were like a whole chunk of my photos are out of focus. Now I didn't notice because sometimes the aperture dial gets hit.
Yeah.
So you don't know in your eye if you're out of focus because it's either one of the two. So I used to tape my aperture dial so it wouldn't move. But then the tape came off and I haven't put it back on. But those are the like weird settings that, you know, sometimes you might not notice.
And sometimes they add to the gold that you capture, right? By mistake, right?
A lot of gold happens by mistake.
You know? So it's you know, it's all part.
As I said, I'm always trying to be proactive, but in editing, I'm always trying to make up for my failures.
Yeah, and you know, like you say, you've captured a lot of great moments. So
Thank you. That's where this whole conversation started.
Yeah, you've captured a lot of great moments, right? And you can't have greatness unless you trip and fall. And
we were talking about a well-known photo that I took of Gord Downie hugging the Prime Minister, and I told you the story that we came into that room. It had two doorways, and we came into that room, and I got on the wrong side of the room, and there was a documentary camera with a light, and I was shooting into the light, and I made the decision to go out of the room and back into the room, and I got the picture of the hug as I hit a light, but
which was like an actual lamp. Right?
It was just like a floor lamp, yeah. But and it made a lot of noise. But it was a conscious decision to leave the room and come back in the other doorway.
Another angle.
So I just started shooting as soon as I ducked around and got into. One of the things you have to figure out in an arena is how to move around the arena, and in a bar is how to move around people with gear. And so I'm pretty good at moving around people if I want to, and like ducking and weaving and moving my body. It's a bit of a dance, and you really have to learn how to do that.
That's why I say that first arena job is so important.
But I can go into any bar now, and if I want to be up at the front,
you know where the cooler is, right? Like, because the cooler, you usually got to walk through the cooler to get to the other side of stage left.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
And also now that I know so many people from shooting so long, I usually know someone at the front.
Yeah.
And people allow me to, and I know how to talk to people, and I say a lot of sorry, excuse me, pardon me, and I'll just be here a minute, and I ask if I can stay there for a minute or two, and usually they let me stay there for not as long as I want. There's a few people you run into who do not want you in their spot, but there are a lot of people who will tell me. They will move. Hey, Dave, stay here as long as you want.
You know the people on the rail for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm any concert. There's someone on the rail that I know.
Yeah, and usually his name's Jeff.
I saw Jeff on or Laurie
Laurie's always there too, right?
Exactly.
But that's part of the community, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was reading that book, and the book I gifted
thank you.
The Amazing Music Project, right? And there was just a person that didn't play a musical instrument, didn't write any music, didn't conceive any songs or anything like that. They were just a music lover. And they wrote about, that's my job. I'm a music lover, right? So that community of the people that listen to the music, like, and the people on the rail, like Jeff and Laurie and countless.
They are music lovers.
For sure.
And a band does not exist without the fans and without music lovers.
Absolutely.
And the industry doesn't exist without music lovers. And I think that we all know it.
Yeah. And so there's a conduit there, right? Between the band, the technicians, and the music lovers, where they actually become one kind of family, right? And they all have their roles to play, and it's
absolutely
like, and it's
and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it's not uncomfortable. But
it's
much
like
like
any
a family.
Exactly. You've met my family.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
So those are special moments in mitigating the journey for everybody in the music industry, right? So, the people that are true fans of the band, they'll know who the crew is, right? And they'll know who the members of the crew are, and they'll have their kind of relationship with them.
Yeah.
And it's very respectful.
Sometimes.
Well,
most of the time.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
I would say most of the time.
I would say most of the time.
And if they're not respectful, then they shouldn't be fans, right?
I can't comment on that. I mean, people are people, right?
Yeah. And concerts are concerts, right? So things get out of hand a little bit sometimes.
But I always had this notion that my job as a photographer working for a band in particular, because there are photographers who don't work for bands who take pictures of live music. And I haven't really had conversations with them about how they approach their job. Some of them work for publications, some of them, now it's different, but some of them work for social media or radio stations or whatever. But I always work for bands. And working for the band and working as a photographer, I always thought my job was to tell the story of the band on stage, but my job was also to make a regular person look like a rock star.
For sure.
To me, when I met them and got to know them, they became regular people who happened to be musicians or rock stars. And I always wanted to turn a regular person into a rock star.
I've seen some of those shots too, right? You have, right? I've seen some front row shots of fans that, when you get a chance, when you're not doing the band, you'll turn around and grab a couple of those. Right?
I don't, there are a couple, but I never made it my habit to photograph the crowd, weirdly, until probably the final tour or two. And I remember Ricky, who was the security guy for the Hip long time, and he asked me why I didn't photograph the crowd, and I don't think I had a really good answer other than my job was to photograph the band.
Crowd's not paying me.
and yeah, the crowd didn't necessarily want to be in the shot or should be in my shot.
Yeah, and you're chronicalizing the stage.
But the final Hip tour, I chronicalized the fans as well. Yeah. And I went out of my way to take portraits of the fans, but that was a different story I was trying to tell.
Right.
To your point about this tour that people in Canada had a different feeling towards, for lack of a better description.
Well, it was just a moment, right? It's hard to describe, right?
Yeah, and being on tour, I mean, again, I really just tried not to screw up, and that's what I thought of it. And we cried every night, but I really just tried not to screw up too badly. And I screwed up, every night, but.
Yeah, but not everybody notices, right?
No, I don't know. I that's just how I go into the job.
But we all, you know what I mean? I can't.
No, I'm just saying that's how I go into my job is I try not to screw up too
Try
badly.
just to minimize it, right?
Basically.
Right?
Yeah.
And just don't get noticed, right? So,
I got called out once by Kathleen Edwards at a concert. And I'll never forget that, where I put my camera up into her face and she made a comment about me to everybody. And I always remember it.
So that kind of lengthened the leash a little bit, I would say, right?
I think she was having fun with me, but it wasn't my job to be noticed.
Right.
And I'm normally not noticed. bands say that. Like, I'm normally really good at hiding, and I had my I do remember it was at the Drake Underground, and I put my camera right up in her face, and she called me out in front of the audience.
Well, let's go with that. She probably didn't know, or she was just trying to play off it.
Oh, I'm sure she was playing off it, but I never forgot it.
Right, and then that's again when you've got the perspective of I'm all dressed in black. Nobody wants to see me. I don't want to be seen, and it's like, okay, I learned my lesson. I'm going to stay back here. Now, you've created some other art that's been spectacular along the way. During the pandemic, one of the things that hit me when I saw some of your pictures was the love campaign during the pandemic.
My hearts. Yeah.
Your hearts, right? Now, David, I'm going to say this. Everything that you create on, there's a common theme and there's a common storytell along the way. And one of the things that you do is you lead with your heart, right? And that
I've been told that.
Yeah,
yes.
that comes out in your work, right? And you worked with the Hip, and they've got big hearts, that band. You know what I mean? I always call it the Downey hugs. Whenever you see a Downey, you're getting a hug, and you're getting a good one, right? And that speaks from the heart. Your projects now, they always have something with love in it, right? So there's a message of love in a lot of your artwork. So you went, tell us a little bit about what you did down in Leslieville for the health workers during the pandemic, which was pretty cool.
I started making these hearts, and I was locked in my house, I guess, and I had some spare wood, and I started carving hearts, and then I started putting them out on the street. And there's one I think it's at Logan, and I carved a heart with a little heart inside of it, and I said, "You have a heart of gold." I did another one outside of a fire station, and I started programming hearts. I actually have made interactive hearts, which is a sculpture series that isn't quite finished yet, but I hope to finish it this year, where I created beating hearts.
Oh, very cool.
Actually, which I didn't show you, but that shape is it originated from a beating heart that I started making. So I make sculptures with, I'm a programmer, and I make sculptures with Arduinos and LEDs and sensors.
Wow.
As well.
So you are a technologist. We come full circle at that now.
Yeah, so I did work in digital for 20 plus years. So I have a sculpture with accelerometers and some other sensors in it that you can interact with the heart, actually.
So this could be a great museum piece, and a modern art kind of museum piece. I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
When you're done, you've got the Bastedo bags too. So
But
before you do that,
sorry.
When I saw a video on it, nobody says Bastedo bags like David Bastedo. Can you come in close to the mic and say
Bastedo bag?
Yeah. One more time.
Bastedo bags.
All right. So where can we get them?
On my website, bastedo.com. And I'm going to be doing a couple of shows this year. I think I'm doing the Kingston Art Fair on Canada Day that I'll have some. And they really just came about because I had a really big painting that I did last summer that I knew I was never going to stretch, and I'd quit smoking and I needed to do something. And my friend had given me a sewing machine, and my mother taught me how to sew when I was in grade maybe 5. Because back in the day, we were all stylish and we wore really tight pants. So
So you needed to take them
I
in,
needed
right?
to taper my pants because
Yeah.
I went to private school. It was one of the forms of rebellion, of course. So my mother said that she was only going to taper my pants once, and that she would show me how to do it because my mother worked. So she showed me how to do it, and I learned to sew. And my grandmother willed me her sewing machine.
Oh.
Excuse me, which I do not have anymore, but my father's mother left me her Singer sewing machine in her will because I was the only grandchild who knew how to sew.
Wow.
And anyway,
that was a forcible pass down generational one, right?
So I sewed, like what I'm doing now with my art and the painting are all of the things I did in high school that I enjoyed doing that I left on the table as an adult and wanted to revisit. So I really got into painting again during the pandemic, and I revisited a lot of the things that I didn't do as an adult that I remembered loving as a child or in my youth. And so I sewed in my youth, I painted, I did paintings when I was in high school. I used to paint toasters, like a toaster would break and there I'd cover it in acrylic paint and make it art.
Beautiful.
And I've actually had a painting stolen off a wall in a heist. Yeah, it's one of my claim to fames. I have a lot of weird claim to fames, and that's one of them. My sister had a company, and they were robbed, and she had one of my paintings on the wall, and they stole my painting. And I want to...
You want it back is what
I'm thinking about going out on social media if I can find the photograph of it and find out 30 years later if anybody's seen my painting. By the way,
and then...
Because it was stolen.
And put a high value on the painting.
The internet can find it.
Yeah, right.
And then, like right behind you, we have these cubes. I call them objects of affection, and I made the box. We're sitting right now in what also doubles as my photo studio. And normally, there's not photographs on it. And I had these cubes for posing, and then my wife's cousin had created a piece of furniture out of. Modeled after an apple box, which is, is a piece of equipment in a studio or on a film set, except she made them out of marble. And I was looking at my white posing cubes, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could paint those. And so I started painting them, and I sold some, and so now I have cubes that I paint, and the one behind you has a bunch of music references and just a bunch of references to dreaming big and
uplifting.
Not all of them, but
there's hope on there.
Yeah, I do like a lot of uplifting stuff.
Never give up hope.
Yes. Well, I had a marijuana plant in university, and we called it hope. There's always hope.
Now that is when you're down and out.
There's always
Where am I
hope,
going?
Right?
There's a song in here somewhere. There's always hope.
Well, I don't play music, so I have to play all these other instruments.
Yeah. David, I can't thank you enough for this time we spent.
I've enjoyed it
together today, and don't stop your art. Keep giving us your art, because through your art you give us your love, right? So if I could bring it full circle, right, and it touches people, it really does.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And it leaves people in a positive way. And I know in the community, we see your photos and it's like, wow, man, you nailed it, right? You did it again. You nailed it. The picture of Andy dancing in black and white, like from Friday, was just, you nailed it.
Thank you.
So that would be the Andy Mays picture from Skydiggers, right?
Yeah.
So again, don't start. So if people want to get some of your art, right, they're going to go to
my website, bastedo.com, and I sell my hip stuff licensed through Live Art. Not all of my hip stuff is licensed, but I licensed photographs with the band and created a business around it that I pay the band, which is unusual for a band photographer, but again, it's from love.
Yep.
I thought it was the right thing to do. So liveart.ca, and my own work is bastedo.com, where I sell paintings and other works of art, whatever, bags
and whatever else is going to come out,
create.
whatever else is going to come, right? So
I like doing different things.
Don't stop the art, right? And that's that's going to be the takeaway is, keep being you. You've taken a few decades to be who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
So far,
right? We're not fully there yet, and just keep going with it because there's no set path.
I don't think you're ever too old to be creative and to change, and I get bored, so I like different things, and I like to explore.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being with us on Northern Echoes.
Thank you for having me.
We have to do it again.